press the go live button?
All right, we did. Yeah.
All right.
Well, holy cow. We are now was deleted on Facebook. What? Okay.
Okay, let me ask, with all these glitches, I mean, this is live.
Yes.
And so the audience, I'm sure they understand and they're patient with all this. But so as long as you want to keep going, I'm fine.
Oh yeah, we're now live. We're good.
We're good.
With all this, but so as long as you want to keep going, I'm fine. We're live. We're good.
We're good. Okay, who has a phone with our show on?
Hold on, let me check to make sure that it's not me.
Don, do you have a phone open with the show on?
No.
It's not me.
Open with the show on?
No.
Open with the show on?
Is it your phone?
No.
All right. Are we good now?
Yeah. This is so much fun, isn't it?
I never saw that before. Gee.
All right. Okay. I'm pretty sure we're good now. Let me just confirm this, and then we can start the show for real.
Hi, it's the Light Gate, y'all. PRN and UFO Paranormal, 107.7 FM and 105.3 FM on the Gulf Coast. Hi. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start that again. Welcome, Don. So sorry about the glitches. We got it done. So we're now live. I've confirmed it. I'm getting folks from chat saying that they can, in fact, hear us. So I think we're good. Right? You guys can hear us?
Yes.
Let us know.
Thumb up.
All right. So yeah, if you could start again.
Be happy to. I was a special investigator for late Dr. J. Allen Hynek. First of all, we'll go down as the foremost authority on the subject. First of all, for being the scientific consultant to the Air Force Project Blue Book, the most famous of their 3 official investigations of the UFO phenomena as far as the United States Air Force. And then he founded the Center for UFO Studies in Chicago, where I served as Director of Special Investigations. I was on his board of directors for 10 years, and I was a skeptic. And the one case we wanted to go after was Roswell. We were so confident that we would make a single weekend jaunt down to Mexico and handily wrap this up and prove that this was nothing more than a conventional balloon device, as they still maintain, or something just as prosaic. And here we are all these years with a museum down in Roswell, which is approaching its 6 millionth visitor. I've had now with co-authors Kevin Randall and Thomas J. Carey 7 best-selling books on the incident. The first was made into the Golden Globe nominated movie Roswell, starring Kyle MacLachlan, Martin Sheen, Dwight Yoakam.
Great movie. Yep.
Green Witness to Roswell was the #1 selling UFO book in the world for over 2 years. Wow. And it's the one that is now slated for the next motion picture. In fact, the Hollywood Reporter just announced the pre-production of that film. And I'm presently working on another book entitled Roswell Generations, where we're going to, essentially bridge the gap between the World War II generation and the Gen Zs today. In other words, why this is just as important today as it was back in 1947 or in the 50s, 60s, and so on. The point being that, as I can't emphasize enough, if indeed Roswell did happen, not only are you talking about the granddaddy of all UFO cases, but you're talking about the biggest story in the millennium, biggest story in the past 1,000 years. And so why shouldn't everybody, be at least excited by the prospect, not fearful, because I was harkened back to 1947 when it actually transpired. That was unprecedented. There was nothing in the Army field manual, crash, flying saucer, that type of thing. And everything prior to the incident, on TV and in the movies, whether it was Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers, what have you, spaceships were rocket ships from another planet, and the aliens, typically from Venus or Mars, they just looked like us. They just had on space, fancy, uniforms that they could, contrive for the characters. So Roswell had to, not only as earth-shaking as it was, they had nothing to go on. And they had absolutely no answers. They didn't know from where, from who, or from why. But yet, I can't emphasize, as I said, enough the fact that these people they did what they needed to do. And they lived out their lives, and they worked, their jobs, and they raised their families, and they continued going to church. So if they could handle it back then,
right.
Anytime we hear that, oh, no, we're not ready. People are going to panic. Culture shock, it's going to throw everything on its ear. Sorry, that's a typical government red herring. Just to cover their tracks. Yeah. Nothing to do with their concern for the general public. I'm sorry. That would be a first. I'm sorry. They're in perpetual campaign mode to get elected. And the very thought that the government is going to, ask the Pentagon to essentially roll over and confess to almost an 80-year deception, lies, after all this time. No, that too, not going to happen. Not going to happen.
So how many witnesses are there? Like direct witnesses as opposed to supporting witnesses?
Well,
how many people have you amassed in terms
well,
of
we've interviewed, we've tracked down and interviewed. And when you think back, we were tracking down witnesses when there was no internet. When there were, the only thing we could do, Kevin Rando and I, for example, we were spending $1,000 a month between the two of us just on our phone bills, because we had to, one call leading to another. We have a name. We don't know what state they're in. And we were doing everything from credit checks to motor vehicle, air certification. We were going through squadron and military reunion rosters. And we would go to the conventions. We'd go to hotels and post in the lobby that if anyone has any information, pro or con, a 1947 Roswell incident, we're in room, whatever, that type of thing.
Yeah, I'm dying to ask you a couple of questions. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to get into this. How many of all of those 600 people did you track were professional observers of any kind? How many of them had scientific backgrounds? How many of them were physicists? Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'm asking this for very pointed reasons. Right. Do you have a count?
Most of them were military. Mm-hmm. And in that capacity, they were certainly highly trained. As far as Roswell at that time, the Roswell Army Airfield was the headquarters of the first atomic bomb squadron in the world.
So you had a lot of physicists on board. That's right.
They were engineers and flight engineers. They weren't mechanics. They were engineers.
Yeah.
And the fact that the 509 bomb wing, that first atomic bomb squadron, they were hand selected. They chose the best officers, the best pilots, crews, doctors, nurses, anyone who was stationed on that base was handpicked because they were the best.
Okay.
And so the irony that not only that this happened, 65 miles northwest of Roswell at that time, but that the very people who were totally familiar with all aircraft, all materials, both foreign and domestic. I mean, they certainly could recognize an off-the-shelf weather balloon with a radar reflector kite that even a 5-year-old child would have, recognized. And we're led to believe that these highly trained personnel at Roswell made just the most embarrassing of mistakes. And as I often point out, it was the first time in history and only time in history that anyone misidentified a weather balloon for being a flying saucer.
Right. Okay, now I have a couple more pointed questions.
Officer, much less. Yeah.
This has plagued me, and given who I am, you'll understand what I'm trying to get at when I get up to it. Have there been any forensic backtracking scientifically of the conditions of the area at the time?
Yes.
And how fast did the military get out there? What was the timeline?
The timeline was that the explosion, the mid-air explosion that rained debris that covered that open pasture, it was a 75,000 acre ranch at that time, high desert.
Yes.
And it covered an area of almost a mile long.
Okay.
And it was the ranch foreman on that ranch, W.W. Brazo, who would discover in the company of a 7-year-old Timothy D. Proctor, the neighbor, his nearest neighbor, who happened to be 10 miles away. Mm-hmm. Imagine that. Your nearest neighbor is 10 miles away. And they discover all this wreckage. Well, it's not until Sunday, July 6th, that he finishes all his work for the week, and he loads boxes of the wreckage into the back of his truck, makes the long trek in the town, and he doesn't report it to the military. He goes to the courthouse. And it was Sheriff George Wilcox who then notifies the very head of intelligence of the 509th at the base, Major Jesse Marcel. Now, mind you, he's the lead, he's the #1 intelligence officer in the military at that time in the country. #1. And then he would retrieve a box of the wreckage. And also keeping in mind, it's a 4th of July holiday weekend. Most of the base personnel are home on leave with their families. So nothing is being tested. As far as most of the men are gone, nothing's been reported missing. Nothing has been reported as far as having been tested and having gone off course or anything of that sort. Be on the lookout for any such reports. The skies are clear, and then this rancher comes in with all this strange debris.
So there were no thunderstorms at the time of the crash?
At the evening of the crash, and we have established with the Stallion Weather Network, we have files that there was a severe lightning storm that came
that's what I wanted to know.
The southern Capitan Mountains and came through Lincoln County between 11:30 that evening.
Did they establish whether it was ground to surface lightning or surface to ground?
Surface to ground.
Surface to ground.
And that's typical for high desert, where the lightning actually strikes the ground. Just imagine that.
Yes.
And we've been out there. We've seen it.
Yeah.
The lightning strikes the ground.
Now, here's the other technical question I would like to ask you. What is the magnetic strength and the magnetic resonance? We have poles and we have field guidelines, and the polarity of them changes and fluctuates, naturally anyway, but sometimes they fluctuate wildly, especially since we started changing our poles. And 1947 was a hot year for that, especially in the high deserts, because the higher you are, that's where it's going to show up first. So in a lightning storm, that could have affected the magnetic field strengths from earth to sky.
Yes. Yes.
And have you got any data on that?
No, because the data at that time, I mean, you have to keep in mind, they were using 1947 technology. And they went in with Geiger counters as far as to check if there was radiation. It was minimal. It was background, nothing out of the ordinary. And even when in recent years with satellite technology, for example, and there are a lot of other tests that I can describe in contemporary terms, but under infrared, it demonstrates that that very location is scorched. It's hot. In other words, at that time, it would have been almost 70 years later, and it still was indicating something.
An electromagnetic burst.
We use the word hot. And so one of the theories is, for example, because when we've had the soil tested against control samples in the outlying areas, the potassium level is very low. Something knocked it down. And also keeping in mind that the rancher's family would tell us in recent years that the cattle and the sheep would not graze on that pasture for 5 years.
Yeah.
And there was nothing out there to scare them away. It was as though there was something in the ground.
Right.
Okay. And so one of the theories is that in their efforts to decontaminate the site, if they were concerned about contamination, that what would have been the agent, the vehicle that they would have used back then? It would have been bleach. And that they would have gone out with 55-gallon drums on the back of their army trucks and just dumped it all over.
Wow.
You're trying to wipe the thumbprint of it away.
Yeah. Try to eliminate, as far as essentially a sponge away, any evidence of the scene of the crime, so to speak.
Okay, now I have another question because it got brought up before we were on air. There was a huge glassified area.
Yes.
What can you tell us about that?
Not huge, but there was. And this was an area that was discovered 2 months later when Dr. Lincoln La Paz, he was the famous meteor expert. He has a whole department named in his honor at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And he was assigned, he is coming off of the Manhattan Project at the time. He's also, he did the study on the Japanese Fugo balloon launches that came Pacific side, and a number made it as far east as like Ohio. That was one last effort on the part of the Japanese at the tail end of World War II. So he was involved with that. And so his assignment in Washington was to go to Roswell with the project of determining the speed and trajectory of the craft.
Okay.
Well, okay. Now let's back up a second. But weather balloon doesn't have speed and trajectory.
Right. Correct. No.
Right.
Yeah. So right there.
There was no weather balloon. We can all say that clearly now. No balloon.
Of course we can. So, and the counterintelligence non-commissioned officer who was assigned to work with him for 3 weeks in the field was Master Sergeant Louis Rickett. Now, Rickett would go on to become a full bird colonel working in Washington. And again, he assisted La Paz, where they spent 3 weeks on this assignment. And we interviewed Rickett extensively. We have him on video, and he describes all the work and even the final conclusions that La Paz arrived at. And according to Rickett, it was about 5 miles north of the debris field that they discovered an area where the ground had essentially been turned to glass, that the desert floor, the sand, the topsoil had been crystallized as though it subjected to a tremendous burst of heat.
Right. Plasma.
Do you know how much heat that would take to do that?
Yes, exactly, Preston. I mean, and it was something.
I mean, what degrees would it take to
27,000 degrees plasma.
Yeah.
All right.
I stated it before.
Yeah, we've heard like upwards of 25,000. So yes,
yes, 20. Actually, UFOs come in at 27,000 degrees. Anybody in the military can tell you that, and they're on full plasma burn at that point, and they're trying to cool down. That's
great information.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing about this location, aside the manner by which they were to immediately tie it to the crash, was that they found more debris, identical debris, from the other location. And Rickett had already observed, he had handled, he knew exactly, as far as the similarities, and it was identical. more debris scattered at that location, and there was a seamless, weightless black box, as he described it, about the size of a bread box, that type of thing. And so it was, according to Rickett, it was La Paz's summation that the object in the midst of that reported storm, whether it was internal or something else had affected it, it had trouble. It touched down. It landed. And then as it attempted to take off, it exploded, raining all that debris down on that location 5 miles to the south.
Now, was there an area where there was a long skid of another vehicle?
Not another vehicle, no.
Okay.
The furrow, the gouge, as we call it, was about 10 foot wide and a few inches deep. We confirmed it, as well, and a few 100 feet long. And it was the first evening when they first located all of the debris, that after he failed visiting neighbors, he went into the nearest town of Corona, trying to find anyone who could help him identify what this material represented, and then who was going to clean it all up. Because again, it's a full mile.
Yeah, and even he knew it wasn't a balloon, because they'd had balloons come down.
Right, so the debris was at the end of this skid mark, yes?
No. Yeah, it did extend. It extended well beyond the skid mark. Brazel going back that first evening with his truck, and even the military confirmed this. He would drag the largest piece 3 miles to the north and then store in a livestock shed. And even in the press release, it mentions that the ranchers stored it in a livestock shed. So that was the piece that was at the end of the gouge. It was too big to load into the back of the truck, so he dragged it.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. I have a question as well in terms of the bodies. Now, how were these described? Were they described as typical grays or little men, or you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Much to the credit of all the witnesses. And I think, again, because of their place in history, the timing, that it wasn't in the vernacular. They didn't use the word extraterrestrial. They didn't use the word alien back then, but they would talk precisely of the little men, the small bodies. They would talk about the little people. They wouldn't call them spacemen. But then when you would ask, now, as one of the base personnel from 1947, when he was asked by Phil Jones of CBS 48 Hours, well, how do you know they weren't from here? To which he responded, they sure weren't from Texas.
Okay, so now I have a
They knew they weren't from here. They had no doubt they weren't from here.
Did they fit the description of grays as we think of them today?
Totally. Except that the eyes, instead of being the large almond wrapped around, were described more like horse eyes. They were just large black eyes, thin slit for a mouth, diminutive nose, diminutive ears, ashen gray, larger disproportionate head, then a silver gray, one-piece jumpsuit collared around the neck, around the wrists, cinched at the waist, cuffed at the feet, and the feet were covered as well. You know, both of you have to kind of laugh, like even our museum, and not that I tell them what to display, but how often aliens are always depicted as being stark naked.
Yeah, no.
And I keep challenging people in all the CE3, the occupant cases. They're always described as wearing clothes, uniforms, what have you.
It's a one-piece jumpsuit, and it's put on them.
It's not skin tight. They may be skin tight, but I mean, so.
They had intact bodies, is what I'm asking.
Yes, yeah, for the most part, yeah.
How many intact bodies?
Okay. Now we're talking about a third location along the same trajectory line. This was 2.5 miles southeast of the debris field. Right. It was atop a bluff, which we call the Timothy Proctor's site because he was the one that took his mother out there and told her about that location. We have 2 additional firsthand that also verify the same location, and 2 bodies were found atop that bluff. So
with no vehicle nearby, nothing, just 2 bodies.
That we're going to go on from there. But that
Okay.
was a secondary body site. Now, whether they were sucked out by the explosion, the decompression, or the percussion of the blast, one can only again hazard to guess. But then another 27 miles from there, just 35 miles north of Roswell, there was a pod, a capsule, egg-shaped, size of a Volkswagen Beetle, and that's where 2 additional bodies were recovered, and the survivor, a lone survivor. So we have 4 locations connected to one event.
The reason I'm asking these pointed questions is this. You know who I am, right? And
Absolutely.
I know a lot about this.
Absolutely.
ET never flies alone. They fly in squads, 3s, in 3s. Your glassified area is one came down because it watched it happen and it didn't know what to do, so it landed hot. That's why it's classified.
But wouldn't it have left debris or not?
Wait. They put 2 down as observers to watch. Okay. They were not in the blast. That kind of blast, ET is like us. They're very fragile beings like we are. And a blast like that would have torn them into multiple pieces. Okay. And I'm sure they found multiple pieces of bodies at that crash site as well. Okay. I don't know whether you have any evidence.
No indication of any biomatter of any sort.
See, that's what's disturbing about this. There should have been. And if you don't know it, they probably kept that from y'all and very much likely.
But let me quickly interject, Dolly.
Yeah.
According to Rickett, because there would have been absolutely no reason to brief him or La Paz on bodies. That was not their purview. I mean, they were to determine speed and trajectory, nothing more.
Yeah.
So according to Rickett, it was La Paz's conclusion in his report that went directly to the Pentagon that it was an unmanned probe that had touched down.
Either that or they vaporized when they blew, because when you're that hot coming in, that kind of plasma will vaporize you dead. There'll be nothing left of you, not even ash.
If I may also interject something, we have to be careful when we talk about coming in.
Yeah.
Because there was no radiation ever detected. And anything coming in, it should be radioactive.
Unless the core was dead and the body was hot. That's the difference. Okay. If the core was dead or ejected even, there would not have been any radiation. And part of their safety protocol for everybody in God is to eject that core or send it back into space. They will immediately get rid of it because it is deadly dangerous to us and them as well.
See, it's our conclusion based on at least all the testimony that we've acquired through the years, is that this was more of a atmospheric craft, that it was launched from a potential like a Starship Enterprise, and it was, and because it was an atmospheric craft, that's why the atmosphere affected it the way it did.
Now, Ricketts is a tremendous witness with so much information. Was he allowed to come forward and share this information, or did he violate any, non-disclosure agreements or anything along these lines?
He was very ill at the time, and when he first spoke out, 6 years before I ever talked to him, 5 years. It was 5 years. He already had a heart condition, and see, it's quite apparent that the military / the government has always had to be very careful about opening up this Pandora's box, in that if they demonstrate too much curiosity, or if they start harassing witnesses after all this time, it's going to bring us all back to the fore.
Right. Yeah.
When they would rather see what will the media's response be, because Rickett was never on, Larry King Live or 60 Minutes or anything of that sort. That's why I am always very leery of when you see someone who is splashed all over the media, especially by today's standards. if these are just useful idiots that are freely, allowed to talk. They wind them up and let them spread all the
Thank you.
disinformation, desired. Because I always cite the likes of an Edward Snowden, that whether one believed him to be a hero or a traitor, but that's what happens to a true, whistleblower. You have to flee the country because you have revealed, classified information.
Right.
And so, so Rickett, I think, because he was only describing wreckage, as a result, they feel they can always fall back on the weather balloon and the radar reflector kind of foil and string and tape, that type of thing. Well, he was just mistaken. And it's his word. He can't prove it. It's not like he could present a piece of hardware.
Right. Which is
And
perhaps
even
why Walter Haut really didn't talk about the bodies for years and years that he allegedly saw, correct?
Well, and in Walter's case, where he was the public information officer, and he had been with the base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, ever since, Operation, the operations in Pacific and Bikini Atoll, as far as where they were actually experimenting already with the atomic bombs. And as a result, Walter would often talk about the old man and Butch, and that was Blanchard. They were that close. And as a result, whenever Walter would describe to us that, well, the old man didn't tell me anything, didn't show me anything, we knew he wasn't being totally, honest. But we also figured out that he made a promise to Blanchard at the very beginning. And we had to provide him with a vehicle, a manner by which he could, tell us all he knew. And that became a posthumous statement that he finally signed. And then it was at the family's discretion that it would be released after he had passed. And this way, he kept his word. As long as he was alive, he never said a word. And as you mentioned, Preston, he went on and he described, that he was taken to the big hangar. He saw the craft, the egg-shaped pod. He saw, as far as the wreckage, he had handled the wreckage. They had passed the wreckage around in the public information office. And there was reason to believe that Walter also had gone out to the site north of town and handled more debris there. But then when he was also shown the bodies under the tarp on the hangar floor, and at first he thought, my God, they're children. And then he saw the size of the heads, and he actually saw the eyes, and he realized all the rumor, everything he had heard previous was all true,
Wow.
And so, but these were honorable men, all of them. And even as far as the ranchers, the civilians, their handshake was their bond. It was their word. And coming off of World War II, where they had long demonstrated that they could keep secrets, and they could be trusted with classified information. And yet, the government, they still resorted to the most extreme measures to silence everyone. The military were threatened with life imprisonment in Leavenworth, and the civilians, as we discussed before, were threatened with death, with the kidnapping of their children, that type of thing.
Right.
And
so here's a question regarding Colonel Blanchard, who I kind of consider a hero for putting out this memo. So can you tell us the whole story of the memo?
Yes.
Did he jump the gun there? Did he have authority to do that?
No. And I know that's another misnomer that the skeptics, especially, and not that you're a skeptic, but I mean that they like to tout out that the late Carl Flock, he would suggest that Blanchard was a loose cannon, that he couldn't be trusted. Well, okay, let's look at Blanchard. He was to have been the second pilot destined for Japan. The boxcar, the B-29, as far as that dropped the bomb over Nagasaki. And the reason they pulled him off the flight was because of the danger, the risk. They had much bigger plans for Blanchard, all the way up to chair of the Joint Chiefs. Blanchard would go on to become a 4-star general by the age of 50. And so Roswell hardly damaged, his resume, so to speak. But looking at the timeline, the chronology, as I said earlier, when the rancher brought the wreckage in on Sunday, July 6th, he arrives by early to mid-afternoon. And then Major Marcel is contacted. He retrieves a box of the debris from the sheriff's office and then reports directly back to the very base commander, Colonel Blanchard. In other words, the ante continues to go up. This is becoming more important by the minute because he's now disturbing Colonel Blanchard on a holiday weekend. And the point being, nobody can identify, no one can, as far as determine what this wreckage is. They've never seen anything like it before. And whereas, whether it be a Blanchard or even a Marcel, if they wanted to just send someone out to investigate, they would 99.9% of the time send out a couple of enlisted men, a couple of grunts, as they would call them. Just go check it out. But who does he send out to investigate? His lead intelligence officer, Major Marcel, and his lead counterintelligence officer, Captain Sheridan Cabot, who was Ricketts' boss. And they're the two head of intelligence that follow Brazel back and to then investigate the crash. Now, Blanchard already has a box of wreckage in hand that was brought over by Marcel from the sheriff's office. He immediately gets on the horn and he calls up his boss, who is General Roger Ramey, head of the 8th Air Force at Carswell Army Airfield in Fort Worth, Texas. Well, Ramey, as we can document, was home on leave. He was in Denton, Texas at that time, and he was also there for the dedication of a new plane. So he's not available, but his chief of staff is, who is Colonel Thomas J. DuBose. Well, DuBose immediately contacts the Pentagon.
Yeah, because DuBose is probably CIA. I want to ask. I want to give you a corollary.
Well, I wanted to quickly finish.
We got to finish the mental story.
Okay.
So within minutes, who calls DuBose back? But General Clements McMullen, the deputy commander of Strategic Air Command. And his orders were, you get Blanchard to have some of that wreckage sent immediately to Carswell, and that the base commander, who was Colonel Al Clark, should strap it to his wrist and bring it directly to Washington. And the point being, Preston, is that Washington already has wreckage, the debris, in hand by late Sunday evening, July 6th. Wow. When does the press release go out? At noon, Tuesday, July 8th. So they've had a full day and a half to put this all together. And so the press release was scripted with Washington because the Associated Press Dateline in the Christian Monitor newsletter, where we have the bulletins minute by minute documented, when Roswell first put the announcement on the wire service at noon, Tuesday, July 8th, who is also exchanging it without any refutation, any dispute at all? Washington, D.C. And then through the afternoon, over the next 5 hours, you see the slow evolution into the weather balloon.
Yeah.
It morphs into the weather balloon.
Reliability.
It's so frustrating.
But I think mostly for this fact, Preston, the debris field, as unusual, as strange as the material was one thing. And I'm convinced they could have always gotten people to believe, and they maybe even thought, hey, now the Russians are really going to think we have something much superior because we also have this fantastic technologically advanced material, memory material, and fiber optics and everything else described. When the bodies, the site north of town, that becomes the much more sensitive location. How do you explain away non-human bodies? And I think that's where, because the press release diverts all the attention away from the body sites, but back to the debris field, to the ranch up in Lincoln County. And so they used it in that regard. And if they couldn't deny something had been recovered because it already had leaked to the press. The rancher Brazel had already talked to Frank Joyce at radio station KGFL. So it was getting out.
So who retracted it? Why put it out and then retract it?
Because it's known, and they learned this in World War II. If you just flatly deny the occurrence of something, then people question and doubt your reliability all the more.
Okay.
Plausible deniability.
You create
every time.
You put out if there's fire, you put out some smoke. In other words, you build up a straw man. First you build it up, but then you tear it down.
Right.
And it was a high risk gamble that with the weather balloon press conference that the press would accept it. But they did, because they were also going on the fact that post World War II, the military walked on water.
Okay, so this was
their
intentional.
final word. Yeah, their final word was, always respected.
So this was all a very carefully planned strategy from the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again,
right.
from Sunday, July 6th to Tuesday, July 8th. So that's hardly a knee-jerk reaction when you got 2 full days. Yeah.
No, it takes time to work things out, even back then. I'm going to tell you something that I know of for a fact. It's in my family. My sister-in-law's uncle was a CIA, in the CIA. He just recently retired. I cannot give you his name. But in New York, in Brooklyn, in 1942, my sister-in-law's mother was a very small child. She was 4 or 5, maybe 6. And she was with him for the day. She was spending the day with him for some reason. And he got a call and he had to go outside the city limits near, he was going toward Long Island. Okay. And she remembers, and she told me this personally to my face, that what she saw was a bunch of government, she called them GI guys. And I said, what do you mean GIs? And she said, hats and suits.
Yeah, we call them suits. Yeah.
Yes. And I said, okay. And she said that I was walking around. He let go of my hand for a minute and I was supposed to stay by him, but I didn't listen to him. And I turned around and I walked towards something that looked funny. And I said, what happened to you? And she said, well, I walked right into something that I couldn't get out of. And what I found out from him was that she walked into nothingness. She walked and disappeared in thin air in front of all of them. Okay. This is 1942. We come to learn from him and her mother that it was a craft that had actually come down in peril for some reason. And it was trying to get back up. And the government became very wise to it very fast. It's New York. Okay. The CIA is very quick in those situations, and they were surrounding everything and keeping everybody back, okay, trying to shield what was happening. There was other government workers there as well. I asked her, how long were you in where you were at? I said, describe it to me, and she did. And what she explained to me was she was inside a small craft, like an egg, okay, and there was 2 beings in there. And when they realized she was in there, they were shocked. They couldn't let her out right away. They wouldn't let her out until they could leave. And when she left, she walked straight out, literally into the arms of her uncle. Okay. He grabbed her. And the next thing we know, this thing took off. I mean, ooh, it was off the ground in less than. Okay. And caused some fluster. This is in 1942. And what I know from the CIA and from what I know from my own father, who was in the military industrial complex, that they were very, very well aware of who ET was by then, even sooner than that, from the 30s on. They had incremental evidence building up, and they were having actual crashes were happening before that. This one actually came down in New York, and it's like a drone pod. Okay,
Yeah, but I think it would be fair to say that the knowledge of this was compartmentalized.
it
to a
is.
degree,
That's
right?
what I'm saying. The CIA clamped down and had all knowledge of all of it in their fists. And nobody, unless you had knowledge to know, were not allowed to know. And I will tell you something. My family was threatened. They tried to kidnap me twice. Okay. My poor brother, oh my God, what they did to him. And my father was under an iron fist until almost within a year of his life. And he was terrified we were all going to be offed, because that's what he told me. They said they would destroy every last one of us without hesitation if he broke and said anything of what he knew. And he knew a lot. Trust me, he knew a lot.
Sounds like Roswell.
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. This is the corollary. Okay, I think that how they were trying once they were notified. Yes, it broke into the system because other people were making up their minds to who's going to know first, and that was their biggest problem. The CIA's biggest problem, and there are CIA plants in the military. Trust me, they're everywhere.
Of course.
Right?
It was
Okay.
a risky game.
They were
to
even
release
in
that
those.
memo.
That's right. And as soon as they got their hands on it, they were clearing a disaster for themselves and everybody else, because you are never going to be told the truth of anything. And I find it phantasmagorical that you've got 600 witnesses. You know, it's like, oh my God, that's some shuffling. You had to bust your keister to get that, you know? And
Well,
it's, go ahead.
But we realized we were racing with the Undertaker, that time was not on our side. And I can't tell you both how frustrating it was at times, where we would finally locate someone and to learn that they had just died the year before.
No.
And we had one that was a week before, and another that we speak to the wife as she's returning from the funeral. And it is something it takes you days to get over, but because due to all the effort in locating them and to know that whatever information they possessed, it's gone forever. Gone. It's not like, well, we'll find you some other time, or we'll call you back, or we'll break you. You're a reluctant witness, and we'll get you to talk to us at some point. And all you can do then is you double down on the next one, because you swear you're not going to let it happen again.
Right.
But
time's running out. Yeah.
and there are witnesses that it took us literally years to finally get them to break down and talk to us. And it would be often at the encouragement of their wives, who would say, you know, they know, they hinted at things, and they would make comments when there'd be something on television, and I know they were stationed there back at the time, but you got to get them to talk, because it's driving, the family, it's unnerving us, thinking that they're holding something back of that magnitude from their own families.
Yeah, well, that's what I find interesting about some of these high-level military witnesses, like Sheridan Cavett. What prompted him to come forward?
Well, Cavett never came forward. We, after he was first interviewed by Bill Moore, who was the co-author of the first book on Roswell Incident in 1980. And Cavett, just brushed him off and had nothing to say. And it was his wife, Mary, who took Bill aside and said, now you have to understand, my husband is still sworn to secrecy. He won't tell you anything. And CIC, it was a predecessor to the CIA.
Yeah.
And as a result, you're talking about a continuation of that same theme. I mean, these were plainclothesmen. Nobody else even knew what their ranks were.
Right.
But they always dressed in civvies.
Yep.
And when we first talked to Cavett, and we spent the better part of an afternoon with them in Sierra Vista, Arizona, which was their winter home. And he just denied all afternoon that we weren't there. I wasn't there. I don't know what you're talking about. I had no involvement, and I have no information. But he was making sure every time we tried to split he and his wife into separate conversations. And Kevin Randall, he would then turn and focus on the Cavett, and I would turn and try to engage his wife, Mary, separately to see if I could get her to admit anything. And we will never forget how Kevin, all at once, he kind of slid up on his from the sofa, slammed both hands on the coffee table, and he goes, "I can't listen to you both talk. If you're both talking at the same time." So he's making sure that he hears everything that both Kevin Rand and I are saying. And then later he would even compliment us that he said they were real pros and that they play good cop, bad cop, like masters. Well, anyway, when we're leaving later that afternoon and we're out at the car, and Kevin would say to us, "Boys, I have to know that should you find anything that would threaten national security, you will keep it to yourselves, won't you?" And we looked at one another. Well, of course, Colonel. Yes, of course. Yeah, we'll be sure to do that. Good. I need to know that. And then right there, we got in the car. We looked at one another and goes, "He knows everything." And but we also know that he would have made a phone call right after we left.
Right.
And that I got an assurance that they were mouth shut if they indeed found something that could be construed as a threat to national security. So he was acknowledging that we were searching for something that was that big.
Right.
And why should we stumble if it's nothing more than a balloon? And we are going where the evidence leads us. That was always our methodology. We were never, we never had, again, this preconceived theory of what it was. Because again, we were skeptics, both of us.
Yeah.
We'll just allow the evidence, the eyewitness testimony, take us to a final conclusion, that type of thing. And so he's already warning us that, well, you may indeed find something that threatens national security. So little by little, as we're meeting with him for the next few years, we're not only demonstrating, we're not only documenting that, contrary to his claim of not being there, he was there, he was in charge of counterintelligence, and he was involved with the incident. At one point, we have him on tape conceding, well, it could have been a flying saucer, but I wasn't involved.
Yeah.
So the last time we're with him, and we're leaving from their home in Sequim, Washington, their summer home. And we're out to the car, and I turn around, I go, "Colonel, I really have to hand it to you. You're a man, of your word. You keep secrets. You're a true patriot." And he thanks me, and then I whirl back and I go, "But Colonel, what gives you the right withholding it from my generation? For all of us who weren't even born back then, you people have decided for all time that nobody can know about this. What gives you that right?" And he just, he muses for a moment, like, "Gee," and he goes, "I never thought of it that way before. But I'm still not going to tell you the truth."
Yeah.
Okay. So, and
well, he didn't have to let you into the house at all. So it feels like part of him does want to talk.
But again, as our reluctant witnesses, as I mentioned earlier, we don't give up on you just because you close the door on us, just because you tell us you're not interested or you have nothing to say. We'll be back because you're actually acknowledging you know something.
Right. Well, people with that amount of knowledge are curious as a cat by nature. Okay. And if you're walking in there asking questions, the very first thing in his head is like, "Well, what do they know?"
That's right.
You're right.
They start asking us questions. In fact, that's exactly how they put it. "Well, what can you tell me? Or what have you discovered? What do you know?"
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that way, when they make their follow-up call, and it's like, we're in trouble, General, because these guys know about this witness and they know about this and they put this together, and we got to watch these two.
Yeah,
and that's where
him alive and his family alive. No kidding.
Question, we'd play just as dumb as they would.
Yeah, there you go. Smart move on your part, actually. A very smart move. Don't
Here's
ever
another
give away
thing
your card. Never.
Here's another thing that intrigues me, because that craft is still somewhere, those bodies. So there are still witnesses directly looking at this thing right now. You know what I mean?
Possibly, because, and I know that's a lot of the talk about that, whether originally when they were pointing fingers at Bigelow Aerospace in Las Vegas, and even late Senator Harry Reid, Robert Bigelow, that he's been working on some of the wreckage, and then Reid would talk about that he had firsthand sources at Lockheed Martin, and that's where some of the wreckage presently was. I'm sure, and because we ourselves have had firsthand witnesses at Lockheed, at Boeing, at Battelle, at Rand, at Bell, at Hughes Aircraft, at Los Alamos, all talking about trying to find the on button, so to speak. My fear is that for all of the claims that they've been able to reverse engineer this technology, I lean more towards, and I'm more confident with my position that it's still a cover-up of ignorance, that they can't bridge the technology.
No, they can't. They never will. And not in your lifetime or their lifetime. They'll never do it. It's because it's not you think it is.
How do you bridge? I mean, where our technology is through layers of progression, trial and error, that we just, how often do we have major breakthroughs, like somebody wakes up in the morning and they figure out how to split the atom, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So what about Corso's claims of, Kevlar and night vision and integrated circuit and so forth?
And I knew Colonel Corso personally. I interviewed him twice. And I also know the author of the book, The Day After Roswell, Bill Burns, very well. And Bill turned it into more of a novel in quoting all the witnesses back and forth, like during the retrieval operation, and that Bill wasn't out there. He had no eyewitness testimony, and Corso certainly wasn't out there. So, that was all, hypothetical on his part. That was all, essentially who could have said what and what would have been said, and just trying to create the scenario for the interest of the reader. But when we learned, and Bill Burns admitted this, that they had made 2 trips to Roswell prior to writing the book.
Mm-hmm.
And that was him and Colonel Corso. And when we asked, where did you stay? And who'd you talk to? And Burns conceded that they stayed with the late Frank Kaufman. And Kaufman had been exposed as a fraud. He was discredited. It was demonstrated that all the information he provided us for our second book was generally erroneous. And as a result, that first chapter of The Day After Roswell, recounting the incident itself, is 100% Frank Kaufman.
I wondered about that because, the book was very interesting and it did really well. But that first chapter was, I'm like, this doesn't sound right to me.
It doesn't sound, and again, and that's what it appears. It was Kaufman's job. We always refer to him as the storekeeper, but he was from Brooklyn, and he was an artist. He was a very good artist. He'd gone to the New York School of Art, and he worked in personnel. He was a sergeant, and he was packed up. They were ready to head home. And even his wife Juanita confirmed how Frank came home and she's all packed, ready to get on the bus to head back to New York. And he tells her, unpack, we're staying. I just got a job with the Chamber of Commerce.
Wow.
How do you get a job with the Chamber of Commerce when you're an outsider? You don't live there. And what do you know?
Because somebody wants to keep an eye on you. That's how.
So he becomes a storekeeper.
Yeah.
And Juanita would describe to us that even the grandson, his name is Rick, that his father, who had preceded in death both his grandparents, Juanita and Frank, but that he talked about the time that Frank brought a piece of that strange wreckage home from the base. And he described how he took it and he took a hammer and he pounded it into the little sheet of metal into a cube, and how he then placed it down and then unraveled, it unfurled, and it smoothed right back out to its original shape and size. Yeah. So that came from the grandson. And then Juanita starts to say, that's exactly what he did in front of us. We saw him do that. So the question is, did Frank get caught with his fingers in the cookie jar?
Yep.
And then, okay, Frank, you're not heading home. You're going to stay here.
That's right. They want him where they can keep an eye on him.
Kevin Randall and a Don Schmitt or a Tom Carey come into town nosing around, you're going to latch onto them. You can't stop them, but you can sure distract them. You can sure divert them.
So he was an intentional disinformation agent, is what
I-
you're
and
leaning towards?
And let me tell you something, both, that happened just weeks before he died. And I went down extra, down to Roswell 4 times while he was dying, hoping to break him, hoping to get him to confess. And I did get him to confess to a number of things. And that was in my book, in our book, Children of Roswell. I did a whole chapter on Frank Kaufman because he wasn't exactly a child of Roswell, but again, he, worked as an outsider and as a civilian, and became part of that camp of people who were involved on the ancillary. Well, anyway, I heard it from both his wife as well as his grandson, Rick, who was staying there at the house as their caretaker. He was taking care of his grandfather. And there was a captain by the name of Edwards. Now, they had saved on their answer machine his calling. And so we were able to trace the number, and it turned out to be in an abandoned office, in Houston. But nonetheless, this is 2 weeks before he dies. And a limo pulls up in front of the Kaufman residence. They were on Barnett Street, south of Roswell. Been to the house many times. It's the house again where Burns and Colonel Corso stayed at those 2 visiting trips. And this captain in uniform comes to the front door. He doesn't so much as knock, ring the door, and he just walks right in. And they're sitting the other side of the hallway, Juanita and Rick. Frank is now confined to his bed. And the captain knows, he turns and starts to go down the hallway, and he knows exactly which door to go to. And he goes into Frank's room, and he would spend about a half an hour, and then he would come out. And here's also part of the strange, scenario. He comes into the family room, according to both of the family members, and sits down in Frank's chair, his recliner, and just sits there for a moment with a smirk on his face, and then rocks a couple of times, and then gets up, not saying a word, and he goes to the front door and lets himself out. The limo is still waiting for him, and they take off. Now, is that the Captain Edwards, who was always calling Frank and warning him and threatening him, and had left that message on his voicemail, on his answer machine? But nonetheless, what a strange story told by both his wife and his grandson of just 2 weeks before his death, as though, okay, Frank, one last powwow, so to speak.
Yeah, he was promising him that his family was going to survive. And if this much,
I'm sure.
Last rites, called CIA last rites, and so that there's no deathbed confession, nothing.
So, and then Frank would pass away, and no deathbed confession of a sort. I did get him to acknowledge and admit a number of things he did tell me, which were inaccurate, were not truthful. He did confirm the true location of the impact site north of town. And when the time was right, Juanita would allow us to go through his office. And that's when I pulled out desk drawers, and I found a satchel behind one of the drawers. And that's where all his actual documents were. And they were in contrast to all the ones that he had forged and faked. And then 2 old typewriters, and then a stack of old parchment paper, and a copy machine. And so he was doing his cut and paste stuff and things. And so it all became quite evident, quite, definitive that he wasn't who he claimed he was, but nonetheless, he made it a point to tell us and describe to us and create a whole new scenario. And so again, I'm convinced, as we call him, he was a storekeeper. He was kept behind to make sure that if anybody started asking too many questions, and the thing is too, if Kaufman, if we didn't talk to him for a few weeks, guess who would call up?
Him. Yes.
And he would, now Don, and it always the question, now Don, who have you been talking to? Who else have you guys found? What else have you been told? That type of thing.
Yeah.
So we know there were a lot of people threatened. I mean, Frankie Rhodes' testimony is very compelling. And
absolutely.
Have you confirmed that people did actually lose their lives? I mean, there's all the talk of the nurse, of course, that Glenn Dennett mentions.
There are suspicious deaths. There is at least rumor of a drive-by shooting involving the 5-year-old son of one of the officers on the base. And we're looking into that. These strange accidents, and there were break-ins in people's homes where nothing of value was taken, except that they still had pieces of some of the wreckage hidden in bedroom closets and shoe boxes, and that would be the only thing that would be taken, that type of thing. So it became, evident to us right away that it wasn't just for a few years that they were monitoring these people.
Yeah.
But like one of the sheriff's daughters told us that they always knew mom and dad were going to start talking about the crash when they closed the drapes and they pulled down the shutters. So they knew they're being watched. And I think one of the sad aspects in all of this was that as it remains in many cities, regions, areas where you have a military facility in conjunction with a local town or a city, there can be a wonderful camaraderie as to almost like an exchange of services. There's a level of comfort that, we got the military right here to protect us. And with the military, that they feel, their moms and dads and their siblings are back home and they're all civilians. And so it's almost like a connection to being back home by at least having, a local community in your midst, so to speak.
Right,
So that was the case, and that was the case before the incident. And immediately after it happened, it was like someone built a wall. There was total distrust. They weren't even chatting, saying hello, acknowledging one another. Everyone was suspect. Everyone was possibly informing on somebody else. And that too, totally inconsistent with this weather balloon nonsense, this balloon nonsense. Again, I challenge, I defy any skeptics. Give me another example where this is the aftermath of a weather balloon recovery. Please, ever.
Incredible.
It's deep. It's very deep. Let me ask you a question. What conclusions have you personally drawn from the Roswell incident? And I'm asking this for a reason. I don't really think they have bodies to show anybody anymore. And it's because of my knowledge about ET themselves. Okay, their AI, their biological AI, are designed to turn to liquid. Okay, when they're turned off. If they're turned off in a catastrophic, they catastrophically will. They cease. Okay, and it doesn't take long, and you can't freeze them or anything. They'll still, under frozen conditions, will turn to liquid. And I guarantee you that every time they've opened a bag, it's been nothing but liquid. Okay. Now, adult ETs, true ETs, they're the ones who are actual biologicals. All right. And from what I understand from the Roswell incident, I don't think you have any of that. I think they're all AI, biological AI, which is their ET works with them all the time. They're the front line for them because biological ET don't do well in our atmosphere, period. Okay.
Right. We don't know that our atmosphere didn't affect them adversely. In fact, even the survivor was described as having great difficulty in breathing. In fact, it was described in different conditions of either lying on the ground, gasping for air, or that it needed to be helped to even walk,
Right.
that it had to be carried into the base hospital.
Right.
And even thereafter, when it was transported to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, that even the witnesses there who we interviewed, who described seeing it there in April of 1948 at Wright-Patterson, that we were treating it like a lab animal, that they felt it was almost heartbreaking to watch that here we were dealing with a being of superior intellect, and yet, in our
it could have been worth to them. Yes.
Well, yeah, so often depicted in motion pictures and in television that our greatest human response in this life is fear, and when we fear something, we attack it. We latch out at it. We shoot it, and so or in this case, we quickly bisect you.
Yes. They wanted to dissect it. Yes.
Now, there's again a trail of a testimony and even documentation. There was a truckload of dry ice that was immediately brought in from Clarity's Dairy after midnight to the base. And we know that others described that they used dry ice to pack the bodies in the crates before they were shipped out. We know there were phone calls that went to the Ballard Funeral Home in downtown Roswell, which was on contract with the Roswell Army Airfield. And because the Roswell Army Airfield did not have a morgue, so they relied on the Ballard Funeral Home. And so there was the question to the funeral home was about chemicals, means of preservation of bodily tissue, which had been exposed to the elements for a number of days. So they were making every effort to preserve these unique specimens, so to speak. And then there was the comment that the bodies were decomposing quite rapidly.
Yes.
That was
literally to liquid.
And so then also one of the questions about, well, why, it's one thing for the wreckage and the craft to go to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. Well, Wright Field, which would become Wright-Patterson, was the headquarters of the Foreign Technology Division, FTD. And FTD would do all the reverse engineering and testing and analysis on all the captured weaponry and armory from World War II, whether it be the Germans, whether it be the Russians, whether it be the Japanese, what have you. And so it made perfect sense. In fact, it's a documented fact that the wreckage from Roswell went to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. Now, what Wright Field also had, which was unique to many of the other facilities at that time, is that they had a cold storage hangar. They had a refrigerated hangar. And that's where they typically would conduct cold engine testing. When, for equipment that would be up in Greenland and Iceland and what have you. So that's where they had it. So they basically could then keep the bodies under ice there as well. Now, we have to always question, especially with the advent of cryogenics and the fact that they, as I pointed out, they made every effort to try to preserve the bodies.
They're not there anymore.
Were they successful? And you certainly would make every effort to preserve.
Even under cryogenics, we deteriorate. Okay, there's no such thing. There is a time limit. If there's oxygen involved, they have to be in a chamber that's devoid of anything in it that will let that tissue be exposed to any sort of light, air, all of that. Okay, that's what cryogenics is, and it's not perfect because they lose containment very easily over time. They deteriorate themselves as a just because of what it is. That kind of energy used in cold will deteriorate the valves and the pressures and all that, the pressure gauges, everything. You can't maintain containment, period, in cryogenics. They know that. That's why people's heads went, because they couldn't keep them, okay? They started burying them, okay?
Here's a question, which it's an impossible question to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What do you think are the chances we'll ever get truth and transparency Will we ever see the Roswell craft? Ever? Will they ever admit to the truth of this?
I won't say never. Never is too finite. But in our lifetimes, no, for this simple reason. And I've testified in Washington, and I've talked to Burchett and Luna and Grothman with the hope that quit dancing around this if you're truly serious about getting to the bottom of, a story that is only second to one other story, at least in my mind. And you keep asking for files. You keep asking for photographs. If I'm sitting at that dais and I'm sitting as far as and that committee as far as posing the questions to these so-called whistleblowers, it would come down to, you got 24 hours to bring me a piece.
Yeah.
I want to handle a piece of the wreckage. I want a tissue sample. I want to see autopsy reports. I want to see the very thing that would crack this open overnight.
Right.
And they never do that, do they? They never do that.
No.
So it comes down to, how serious are you? How serious are you really wanting to get to the bottom of this? In other words, I don't want, I'm investigating a murder, and he's like, well, I don't want to see the body. I just want to see a picture.
Yeah, you want hardcore evidence. I know.
And for something of this nature, this will require the greatest, amount of evidence of all. And so that's why, Preston, I have very little faith, very little confidence that their intentions are as sincere as ours. And as a result, because we know what we would say, we know what we would demand. And we saw it like with former President Jimmy Carter. It wasn't a executive order when he asked NASA to look into this. And Bill Clinton, when he asked Webster Hubble, at the State Department to bring him, 2 answers, who really killed JFK and the truth about UFOs. Well, again, why didn't you make it an executive order? And the same thing now with Trump a few weeks ago. I asked for the files. They're going to tell you to go eat sand.
They're not going to tell you nothing.
Tell you anything.
Grush just sued again the government this week in a second attempt to get information that he asked for before through FOIA, and they said nothing, zero response. I told Preston that was going to happen. Nobody's going to get anything from them.
And all they have to do is, it's their military way of pleading the fifth.
Well, what would it take? There's got to be a way to get to this.
Well, they have to be bigger than them. If they have to be, it has to be bigger than them. It would take ET coming down and saying, you know what, we're sick and tired of you, and you're going to tell them the truth right now.
It would take the toppling of the government. I don't know what else.
I don't know. They're not afraid of anybody, and I'm telling you, it would take somebody like ET to make them do it, and they won't.
I think the best example, Preston, is Dwight Eisenhower. At the time of the Roswell incident, he was chief of staff of the Army. So he was up to his eyeballs in the truth. He knew everything about what had transpired down in New Mexico. So he becomes a 5-star general, not a 4, which is the highest rank you could. So the 5th star is a congressional promotion. And there's only a handful in our history that have ever acquired that. He's a 5-star general. He becomes 2-time president. And in his memoirs, he complains that after he became president, the Pentagon didn't tell him anything any longer.
Yes, he even warned everybody about the military farewell.
The last 10 presidents combined.
Yeah,
and yet
you realize that, right? The biggest things he said to this country were in his farewell address.
Yeah,
and he point blank pointed a finger straight at the military-industrial complex, and that's the Department of War, the DoD, the CIA. Okay, those 3 entities right there are not going to tell you smack, and they have reasons why. They have an actual agenda. They know what they're doing and why they're doing it. And that's the hard thing to convince people. You have to really take that into consideration. That's the one question you must ask yourself, and everybody else for that matter. If they're not talking, what the hell do they have to fear to talk? What is it they're planning that would screw up all of their plans? Because they do have plans, and that's why you're not getting an answer. There's only one direction that can go. And they have a giant reason, one giant reason. And they've been planning and planning and planning. That's evident. There's evidence after evidence after evidence all over this globe that they're up to their eyeballs in lies, protecting themselves from something that they know and we don't, and you never will. And they know why too.
It becomes a self-perpetuating cover-up, and that it gets handed down from generation
to generation.
Most of the World War II generation, they took their secrets with them to their graves. I more than once have talked to high-ranking present military officers lament the fact that the old order did not pass anything down to them. So they're at a disadvantage. And the point being, and as Dolly brought up, as far as the military-industrial complex, they are exempt from freedom of information.
Yes.
You can't even go after them.
Nope.
You can't even subpoena them to come and testify, because all they're going to say is
national security, baby.
Yep. Or
we hold the code.
Or
I know nothing.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about.
So we have like 5 more minutes. I want to go through a quick run through of some of your books so you could tell people what they're about a little bit.
Well, Children of Roswell, I had mentioned that earlier, because we discovered early on the investigation that the families, not only were they involved, but they also had their own stories. They had their own personal accounts in describing not only the threats, not only watching and observing their parents live a lifetime of fear and intimidation, but they also handled wreckage. They saw things. They confirmed the military and their activities, their strong arm tactics. And so family after family, the sheriff, you mentioned Frankie Rowe, Preston. Frankie Rowe, her father being a crew chief on the Roswell Fire Department, and how they came to her house and put her sister Dottie in the bedroom, and then they listened to it was First Lieutenant Arthur Philbin with a big baton, and he was a 6'4", 250-pound football player, and then with the baton, and if you ever say another word about this, we will kill your children, that type of thing. So all of those stories in the book and many more, as we in describing Wright-Patterson, that you have all the people involved in the recovery, the retrieval, and then all the transporting of the wreckage and bodies from Roswell, and then who was on the receiving end, the personnel, the doctors, the technicians, the engineers at Wright-Patterson who were involved with the testing, the autopsies. So then we have all the accounts of those on the receiving end, and that would be Wright-Patterson within days after the incident in Roswell. So you put the two together. This is the cover-up. In other words, what they did to silence the military, what they did to silence all the civilians involved, what they did to shut down the media, how they deprived them of their First Amendment rights by essentially creating a blackout, not only in Roswell, but the entire state of New Mexico. And then what they've done to the witnesses, including the politicians like the late Senator Stephen Schiff, or Congressman Stephen Schiff, who tried to call for congressional hearings on Roswell, and how they silenced him, what they did to him. And that's the contemporary, that's in recent times. So again, don't tell me there's not a cover-up of Roswell, because it's been going on for almost 80 years.
Yeah, it's still going on. Of course, this is the big book.
The big bestseller of all, Witness to Roswell, which will be the next movie, and allowing the witnesses themselves, the firsthand, the military, the civilians, down to their children as they were back then, and how they all describe in their words the extraordinary response to an extraordinary event. And it doesn't matter if you were the highest ranking 4-star general or if you were a 7-year-old child back then. You all reacted the same, that it was extraordinary. There was nothing that they could compare this to. And as a result, they're all reading from the same script, or they're reporting exactly what they witnessed, what they experienced at the time. And it's the latter. It's clearly the latter. This is the first book, the predecessor to the Wright-Patterson book. So the Wright-Pat is the second version of Area 51. Everyone talks about Area 51. 51 didn't even exist that time. It was 8 years later. So everything went to Wright-Pat in Dayton, Ohio. And this is Roswell's Day in Court. Roswell, the ultimate cold case, closed. So we start out with our opening arguments, and then we go through all of our evidentiary, and then we go through our best witnesses, and then our closing summation of what, based on all of that eyewitness testimony actually happened. So
everybody needs to get the set. Okay. Sell it as a set. Not kidding. Offer it. They'll get them.
Just when you think you know Roswell, you don't. There's more to it.
Which in itself speaks of the fact that it's the gift that only keeps growing. But the fact that, as you mentioned, Preston, they certainly have to still be working on this. They certainly have to go back to it whenever they have a new, idea or a breakthrough of what might work, what might finally, crack the code, so to speak, and allow them to gain some new knowledge on what they have in their possession. And so
some of it's leaked out, really, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you, for instance, the fact that it opened up after being made into a square. That's a molecular memory. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we do now have examples of molecular memory that they're making into textiles and things like that have actual molecular memory. And they back engineered that. That's open back engineering right there. There you go. That's just one thing. We're pretty smart people. So a lot of stuff that they've engineered is we were already on the precipice of something, and we used the technology that we were looking at from them and added upon it and made new stuff too as well. Okay. Our communications, light communications, underwater cables and stuff like that. That's a piggyback type of technology that they got off of them that they made into it. So our communications were much better. Okay. Laser technology they got from them. There are all kinds of things that they got off of that. And any physicist can tell you there's almost there's a progression of things that are out there in the open. One of them just happened during the war. They have microwave technology now where you can shoot missiles down by EMPing them in midair.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a direct energy
we have to wrap it up here. We've got like 2 minutes and we're really pushing it at that. So sorry about the technical difficulties.
I know. So when is
maybe it was some of the suits that were
yeah.
having fun.
Do you have any last things you want to leave with the audience before we say goodbye?
Well, we certainly always invite people to come see us down at the Roswell Museum and see it firsthand. There's a tour that takes you to the landmarks within the community which were involved back at the time of the incident. Certainly the books that are available, specifically on Amazon. But I think overall, to assure both of you and certainly your audience that we are still working on this. We are still tracking down now. We're families where we're getting more and more deathbed confessions. We're up to presently 30 deathbeds, which unanimously all say that it did happen. That whether it's their father or their grandfather, that before they died,
all by itself. Yeah.
And that's admissible in a court of law. So whenever anybody says you don't have any physical evidence, well, actually we do. Because deathbeds are considered physical evidence in a court of law.
That's right. It's
amazing. Well, thanks very much.
Thanks for having me back. I always enjoy it.
Yeah. Stay with us for a few minutes after we hang up the line, because I want to go ahead and get you back on with us in like a couple of months and
okay.
do this.
Yeah, because there's still lots to discuss. But I do want to give a quick shout out to all you guys. I know we had a late start, but thank you, Sonny Burnett. Namaste, you guys who donated. We really appreciate it. Tim Houston, Becky Sloan. I'm going to do this fast because we're out of time. Oguz Hanardik, OG Gook, Yahara. Thank you guys so much. We couldn't get to the questions. We're going to have Don back. Amazing, Don. Absolutely enjoyed having you on.
Absolutely.
It was a quick 2 hours, but you guys made it work. You got it. We didn't give up. So
no, not going to either. All right. Thank you all for joining us on the Lightgate. We're coming to you live from the beautiful city of New Orleans in Louisiana at the United Public Radio Network at 107.7 FM and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. We are on Facebook, we're on Roku, we're on Rumble, and we're on YouTube. I want you all to think about everything we said. Buy the books. Please educate yourselves. This is true, really good education you'll be getting through these volumes that he's put together. Do it. Love you all. Night, night.